morning, everybody. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. An almost miraculous thing happened to me. About 6 weeks ago, somebody was selling their books because they were moving in the village. And a friend of mine picked up a book by St. Teresa of Avila from the book called Interior Castle, written in 1577. She writes, "I began to think of the soul as if it were a castle made of a single diamond or of very clear crystal, in which there are many rooms. At the center of the crystal, she saw God, but it was difficult to get close." Let us light our chalice. As I light this candle, light a candle in your heart. We say our chalice lighting words together. We light this candle as a symbol of our faith. By its light, may our vision be illumined. By its warmth, may our fellowship be encouraged. And by its flame, may our yearnings for peace, justice, and the life of the Spirit be enkindled. We now have a period of time when anybody who would like to say a few words of care and concern or of joy may do so.
I am going to light a candle of joy for one of my close friends. They have finally had or are expecting their first child, and it is considered in our friendship circle the heir. So there's a lot of anticipation to this baby Newman, which is due in December of this year.
I'm lighting a candle of love and care for the family of Frank David Williams, and in particular his daughters Sarah, Ross and Rose, who we met on Thursday, as they have emptied his house and cleared it, and this is the break for them with Chorley. So loving thoughts go to them at this difficult time.
We will now sing or say together, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, give life, the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
We'll now sing our first hymn. It's number 33 in the Green Book. Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand? Do you hear in the hush of your soul, of your soul? Hymn 33.
Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, do you hear? In the heights on the plain, in the vale on the main, in the sun, in the rain, do you hear, do you hear? Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, of your soul? Hear the cry that won't still, hear the heart's call to will, here's a sigh, startling trill in your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear, do you hear? All the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers, all them yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear, do you hear?
Thank you, Robert. I really enjoy singing along with you. I have to remember to mute, though, and then I have to remember to unmute, which we have now done. So a prayer. Great Spirit God, help us to be sensitive to you. Help us to overcome the noise that hides you. Help us to tune our spiritual receiver to approach you. Help us to avoid getting onto the wrong wavelength. Help us to hear your message with volume and clarity. Help us to tune to your various wavelengths to get your different messages. Help us to record your messages within our own spiritual soul. Let us now say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So as my story, I'm going to say something about my very first memory, and then something about the way we pass on our own spiritual knowledge. My first memory is when we escaped from the bombing in London 80 years ago. My father had been interned as he was not British. But when he was released, I was 2 at the time, the family moved to a boarding house in Blackburn. To start with, we lived in a terraced house nearby. My parents would have been very anxious. And I can still today, in my mind's eye, see that terraced house as we approached it. These things stay with us as part of us. Another illustration derives from the fact that Ruth, if she had to bake a cake in a hurry, always made a Swiss roll. You might know it. It only takes about 10 minutes in the oven. Recently, I made a Swiss roll with my 8-year-old grandson, Alex. A few days later, Bridget, my daughter, came down to breakfast and found that Alex had on his own already made a Swiss roll. So my reading this morning comes from a book of memoirs by Adam Rushton, who was our first minister about 160 years ago, before the current chapel was built. It was the time that the land for our chapel was being purchased. And our spirit, our soul, if you like, is derived in part from the spirit of our forebears. So from Adam Rushton's book, My Life, which has now been republished. The purchase of this land, which took place after I had left, was a very clever piece of work. A friend of the congregation living in Cann was employed to buy the land and then made it over to the trustees of the congregation. Up to that time, it had been impossible to get land for a Unitarian chapel at any price, every attempt to do so being treated with scorn. When therefore it became known that a whole field was actually in the possession of the Unitarians, the anger and disgust of the great landowners, as also of all Orthodox neighbours, knew no bounds. Nothing daunted, our friends hoisted a flag on the top of the old chapel, which floated in the breeze for many a day, none daring to take it down. Although 45 years have passed since my labours in Padiham ceased, I could easily give the names and describe the personal appearances of nearly all the members of the congregation. Just a few I must point out, as they appeared from my position in the pulpit. In front of the organ, in the gallery, was always seen Thomas Holland, the leader of the choir. His serious and intelligent-looking face was frequently so fixed on the preacher that he forgot to have the tune ready for the following hymn, when a hasty rummaging of books ensued. His religious impressions were of a durable kind and influenced his daily life and the lives of his family, all the members of which grew up to be steady, studious, musical, useful in business and in the schools and chapel. Just to the right of the singers, in a three-cornered pew, was always seen the large and fine head and face of the elderly John Birtwistle. Nothing of moment in the sermon did he overlook or forget, nor did he fail to have the subject discussed in the family. Even, I must say, I like that word, it says something. Even his daughters were led to enter into these matters with as much zest as himself. One of the daughters became the wife of Joseph Pollard and aided him in his very successful mission in London. On the other side of the gallery, near the singers, sat Eli Whitehead, a joiner and builder who was often employed by Sir J.K. Shuttleworth, who esteemed him highly. He was a peaceable, good-living, hard-working man, and musical withal, as were his daughters, one of whom became an efficient player of the piano. His wife was a sturdy, sharp-spoken, sound-hearted, good-managing woman. Altogether, the Whiteheads presented a specimen of a first-rate Lancashire working-class family. I think you have a lot to live up to, Robert. Eli was an ancestor of Robert, who is with us today, of course, and whose soul contains elements that derive from Eli. Adam Rushton goes on to write about Henry Holland, Jabez Robinson, Esther Becker, and her sister Lydia, Alice Kershaw, the Pollards, the Wilkinsons, the Waddingtons, the Andertons, the Lancasters, Hulls, Harrisons, Briggses, Berrys, Dodgsons, Ainsworth, and Laycocks. The earliest members list we have, is 1868, 6 years after Adam Rushton left Padiham, with it has about 160 members, including 17 Robinsons, 12 Hollands, and 12 Wilkinsons. And of course, there would be many who didn't have the family names who had married. Our souls, our spirit is formed with the elements from past generations. Here you can see that list. It's the earliest one we have before the chapel was built, full of Robinsons, Wilkinsons, Hollands. We were a very family chapel, composed of a few very select but numerous families. We'll now sing our second hymn, is 147 in the Purple Book, Spirit of Earth, Root, Stone, and Tree.
Spirit of earth, root, stone, and tree, water of life flowing in me, keeping me stable, nourishing me. Oh, fill me with living energy. Spirit of nature, healing and free. Spirit of love, expanding in me. Spirit of life, breathe deeply in me. Inspire me with living energy. Spirit of love, softly draw near. Open my heart, lessen my fear. Sing of compassion, help me to hear. Oh, fill me with loving energy. Spirit of nature, healing and free. Spirit of love, expanding in me. Spirit of life, breathe deeply in me. Inspire me with living energy. Spirit of life, you are my song. Sing in my soul all my life long. Gladden and guide me, keep me from wrong. Oh, fill me with sacred energy. Spirit of nature, healing and free. Spirit of love, expanding in me. Spirit of life, breathe deeply in me. Inspire me with living energy.
Spirit of life, you are my song. Sing in my soul all my life long. Let us now share a time of prayer, which will be followed by a period of silence for our own silent prayers, and then by a musical meditation. Great Spirit God, help us to see into our own spiritual soul. Help us to understand the sources of our own spirit. Help us to share our spiritual soul with others. Help us to see into the depths of our soul. Help us to refine our spirit, to become closer to your great Spirit. And help us to reinforce our spirit, our soul, with a better knowledge of your great Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Barry. You are a worthy successor of the organist over many, many, many years. Locating the soul. So there are many things for which we have words which are difficult to describe what they mean. I suppose one is God, but also there are others, some less obscure and difficult, like love. God is becoming easier to me in terms of the great spirit of all that is past and present. But alongside God, there are two words that I would like to understand better, and they are soul and grace. I want to try to understand soul in this address. What is our soul? Why might it be important? When I interpret God, I say that God is the spirit of everything and all those around that have gone before, and the spirit of all living things. The soul, to me, is that part of God, the spirit of us all. I will attempt to locate our souls, but I must emphasize that this interpretation is, of course, very personal to me, but it might help you to locate your souls. You might remember, but you might not remember, the service where I described the flight of the monarch butterflies. They migrate to a few places in Mexico in the winter, from all over the North American continent. After mating, they diffuse again across the continent, and on the way, they breed several times. Still later in the year, these children of children again return to where their forebears had originally migrated to. Somehow, that instinct, if you like, is built into their DNA. That tells us something wonderful. And it causes me to wonder, what might we have built into our DNA that causes us to take certain actions? The fact that my parents had to flee the Holocaust must somehow be built into me. People who starved in the Irish potato famine will have the same. Parts of the United States nation who went to the US will have something built into their spiritual inner self. And Black people whose forebears were slaves will have the same. Well, I believe the knowledge of God as a spirit, that is, the spirit of all that has gone before and exists, is part of the DNA of humanity. We see the need for God everywhere. It just so happens that God pops up in different ways: Jews, Catholics, Buddhists, Islam. And though these are different fundamentally, it is the same search. It's the same God. Of course, when we personalize it, as Christians do, it appears to be different. But I think fundamentally, it's the same. Humanity has built-in receptors to interpret the spirit. These receptors are basically the same, but if you like, pick up different wavelengths of the message. Prayer is our common way to refine our receptors and contact with the Great Spirit. We have different ways of doing so. Even Quakers do so in their own way. the soul to me is our spirit, the essence of ourselves. When a loved one dies, while their physical presence is no longer with us, their spirit very much is and continues to influence us. The Swiss roll story illustrates this in a graphic way. We also, while alive, contribute the whole time to this spiritual essence of ourselves. Add this to the DNA elements that have developed with us over thousands of years, and that, to me, is the soul. You cannot see it or really describe it individually, but the word soul describes our part of the great spirit God. It is composed of pieces from generations back, pieces from things that have occurred over millennia. We have basic fears and instincts that are part. Our desire to replicate ourselves is built into our DNA. The need to be loved and protect our children are all part of our DNA, our soul. The way we live and the physical reactions to difficulties are the same. I read an interesting book at the beginning of the lockdown, Blueprint. It was written by a geneticist. We all know that we share some physical traits with our relations. I have flat and narrow feet. So did Ruth have flat feet? No, I beg your pardon. She would punish me for that. Narrow feet. And actually, what do you know? That all our children have narrow feet. Certain skills and impairments come in families too. We have our fair share of dyslexia and art and music talent. What the book Blueprint showed was that other psychological traits also were built into our DNA, things that caused us to be overweight. Some people just do not put on weight, others just cannot easily avoid it. Some people are easygoing, others are anxious. By studying hundreds of thousands of DNA, Blueprint proved that we can predict the probability of different traits. It's a worry if we start to modify DNA, or if insurance companies get hold of your DNA. Perhaps we can see why the caste system developed in India. So the idea that our receptors for the great spirit God might be stronger in some of us is not too far-fetched. Our spirit, our soul, is part of the great spirit. We have a fascination for digging up our ancestral past. The reading is an example that is important to Robert and his family. I have gained a lot from digging up my past. I have information back 2 to 3 centuries, but there will be more that I don't know. However, it will all be part of my inner self. I might think that I have forgotten or even lost much of it, but that is not true. As I dig up some pieces, I remember others. So it is all, in fact, part of my spiritual being, my soul, which is a small part of the great spirit God. Often we may not remember, but it is there, and like with the monarch butterflies, it is deep within us, part of our DNA. Sacred places, too, have a spiritual presence delivered by many souls, and we pick up the wavelengths of the Spirit when we visit them, when we worship in chapel, for example. Our own soul has elements buried deep inside us, It was Freud who realized that digging deep into ourselves can often interpret how we are today. I'm scanning some old slides, and as I do, it is amazing what thoughts and feelings come to the surface, all previously buried deep in me. Religious and ethnic groups tend to keep together to control the development of the soul. Jews and Muslims are examples, but slowly our souls become mixed. It is a long process, but our souls, our inner spirits, are the essence of us. Prayer and meditation reveals a small part, but much is hidden. But it is there, and it is the very center of our being and part of the great Spirit God. Saint Teresa realized that the soul contains many rooms, a castle made of a single diamond, in which there are many rooms buried inside, all an essential component of the one great Spirit God. Amen. Our fourth hymn is number 199 in the Purple Book, Weaver, God Creator. I have chosen this, which was introduced to me by Robert just recently, because actually I am a weaver back 3 or 4 generations on both sides of my family. And weaving must be part of my soul. Weaver, God, Creator.
Weaver, God Creator, sets life on the loom, draws out threads of color from primordial gloom. Wise in the designing, in the weaving deft, love and justice joined, the fabric's warp and weft. Called to be co-weavers, yet we break the thread, and may smash the shuttle and the loom instead. Careless and greedy, we deny by theft. Love and justice joined, the fabric's warp and weft. Weaver, God, great Spirit, may we see your face, tapestried in trees, in waves and winds of space. Tenderness teach us, lest we be bereft of love and justice, join the fabric's warp and weft. Weavers we are called, yet woven to wear born, for the web is seamless if we tear we're torn. Gently may we leave that fragile earth be left, love and justice joined, the fabric's warp and weft.
thank you. I think I must have that at my funeral. The benediction. As we leave this place, let us, through prayer and meditation, open ourselves to the Great Spirit and that part, our soul, which is deep in us, and at the same time cultivate it to develop as part of the Great Spirit God that surrounds us. Amen. We'll now have the postlude. I beg your pardon. We will now distinguish the candle. It's there in front of me. So though we distinguish the light of this candle, our faith burns on, our vision remains bright, our fellowship warm, and our yearnings for peace, justice, and the life of the Spirit constant. So be it, until we meet again.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.